Hola, saludos cordiales. Bienvenidos a esta especialísima conexión para la Feria Internacional del Libro de Guadalajara, para la 35ª edición de la FIL. Es una edición muy especial, híbrida, mixta, precisamente obligados por la pandemia que nos ha obligado a reinventarnos como especie en estos últimos años, en estos últimos 2 años ya casi. Y la verdad es que nos ha empujado a un momento casi de ciencia ficción. Les hablo como escritor afincado en Madrid. Mi nombre es Javier Sierra, soy autor de muchas novelas publicadas por Editorial Planeta, pero la persona con la que quiero dialogar con ustedes en esta velada está en Boston. Él es Avi Loeb. Avi Loeb es un prestigioso científico que lleva tiempo vinculado al Departamento de Astronomía de la Universidad de Harvard, al Instituto de Teoría y Computación del Centro de Astrofísica Harvard-Smithsonian e incluso ha sido miembro del Consejo de Asesores del presidente de los Estados Unidos en Ciencia y Tecnología en Washington. Lo que nos lleva a hablar con él es un libro que es provocativo, revolucionario, inspirador, un libro de categoría científica y por eso estamos dentro del programa de FIL Ciencia, que creo que va a dar mucho que hablar, ya lo está dando de hecho en muchos países, pero va a dar mucho que hablar todavía en los próximos meses. Ese libro se titula Extraterrestre, la humanidad ante el primer signo de vida inteligente más allá de la Tierra. La historia con la que comienza este libro, permítame que se la resuma, parece sacada de una novela de ciencia ficción. En septiembre de 2017, el observatorio Pan-STARRS en Haleakala, Hawái, que tiene una de las cámaras de mayor resolución del planeta Tierra, localiza un intruso, un cuerpo celeste que viene de otro lugar del universo. Procede de la zona de la estrella Vega, parece que su rumbo es la constelación de Pegaso, pero se aproxima a gran velocidad, a unos 25 kilómetros por segundo, a la órbita del planeta Tierra. Es detectado en esa época, en septiembre de 2017, durante unos días, por esas cámaras tan precisas y por primera vez la ciencia se enfrenta a algo que no había visto nunca. No sabe exactamente cómo catalogarlo. Avi Loeb tuvo la oportunidad, nuestro invitado, de estudiarlo durante mucho tiempo y llegó a conclusiones extraordinarias, que son las que publica en su libro. Él sugiere que ese visitante, que recibió un nombre hawaiano, Oumuamua, que literalmente significa mensajero que llega desde un espacio lejano, él llega a la conclusión de que se trata quizá de la primera conexión, del primer avistamiento, del primer encuentro con un objeto artificial extraterrestre. Esto es mucho decir. Esto puede cambiar la historia de nuestra percepción como especie. Y esto es lo que nos va a contar Avi Loeb. Avi Loeb, bienvenido. ¿Qué tal? Bienvenido a la Feria Internacional del Libro de Guadalajara.
Thank you so much for having me. And I should make 2 footnotes. One, that half of my DNA is Spanish, and that's the better half. And the second comment I wanted to make is that I regard the science as an extension of our childhood curiosity. So if you ask people that know me from childhood, they would say that I haven't changed much. So all of the titles that I have acquired in academia during my career are not very significant in my mind. I'm just trying to understand the world.
Usted, de hecho, iba para filósofo, si no me equivoco. Es decir, que antes de integrarse en los estudios del universo, en realidad su primera carrera, su primera opción era estudiar filosofía.
Yeah, in fact, I loved philosophy at a young age because it addresses the most fundamental questions. But now, in retrospect, you know, circumstances brought me into science despite my wish to study philosophy. And at the end, I realized that we can address philosophical questions using the scientific method, which is pretty much what I do right now. Questions about how the universe started or whether we are the smartest kid on our cosmic block, which we will discuss today. These are philosophical questions that a lot of generations thought about, but now we have the tools of science to address them. And I think that it's really important for us to be guided by evidence, because 4 centuries ago, there were philosophers that thought that they know that the sun moves around the earth. And Galileo Galilei argued otherwise. He looked through his telescope and wanted them to look through his telescope, and they refused to do that. And they put him in house arrest. Today, they would cancel him on social media. And my point is, we've learned over the past 4 centuries that they were wrong. In fact, we have space missions that use the fact that the Earth moves around the sun. So even though they insisted that they know the truth, reality is stubborn. It's whatever it is. And the Earth continued to move around the sun, irrespective of what the philosophers said. So this is an important lesson for us to pay attention and give our respect to evidence and not to prejudice, which is pretty much the way I work right now. And I actually established a new project in July 2021 that is called the Galileo Project, because a few multi-billionaires came to the porch of my home and asked me questions about my book, and they were inspired by the vision and gave me $2 million to my research fund. And I decided to establish a project that will try to identify objects near Earth that may have originated from other civilizations.
Claro, porque de alguna manera una de las propuestas que usted hace más arriesgadas en el libro Extraterrestre es que quizá deberíamos desarrollar una nueva disciplina científica que fuera algo así como la arqueología extraterrestre, ¿no? Quizá un intento por buscar vestigios de inteligencia, de tecnología, que estén orbitando alrededor de nuestro planeta o que pasen simplemente cerca de nuestro planeta.
Yes, so in fact, now we know things that we didn't know decades ago. And for example, last year, there was a scientific paper arguing that the Earth-Sun system is very common, that in fact, half of the sun-like stars have a planet the size of the Earth, roughly at the same separation. And that means that not only that we are not at the center of the universe, like those philosophers 4 decades ago were arguing, we are not at the center of the universe, but moreover, what we find in our backyard, the Earth-Sun system, is very common. And that convinces me that we should be modest, that we should not assume that we are special and very privileged. We should look at the sky and search for other civilizations, especially because we also know that most of the stars formed billions of years before the sun. So just imagine a civilization like ours developing artificial intelligence and sending artificial intelligence systems into space. These are autonomous systems that you educate early on, just like you educate your kids. So you educate them through machine learning, and then you send them into space, just like you send your kids into the world. And then they become autonomous. They are not needing your guidance because signals take a long time to travel across interstellar distances. And if we can imagine doing it ourselves, then a civilization that was born 1 billion years ago before us could have done that already and could have spread such systems throughout the Milky Way galaxy. And the question is, are we living in a reality of this type? And it's not a philosophical question. We can answer this question by using telescopes. So we should look for the answers through our telescopes, just like Galileo Galilei advocated. And that's what the Galileo Project is all about.
Bueno, usted en Extraterrestre, en su libro, viene a decir que nosotros ya hemos hecho eso que usted especula que quizá hayan hecho extraterrestres. Hemos mandado nuestras Voyager o nuestras Pioneer al fondo del universo casi como si fueran balizas con las que saludar a una hipotética civilización con la que un día podrían encontrarse.
Yes, and I should point out that I'm a little bit embarrassed by, for example, the New Horizons mission that we sent out, because NASA decided to honor Clyde Tombaugh, the scientist who discovered Pluto, because New Horizons was a mission to visit Pluto. And so they put a little bit of his ashes, the ashes of Clyde Tombaugh, on the spacecraft to honor his memory. And unfortunately, that's not a good way to celebrate a person, because what are ashes? They are burnt up DNA. You take the information content of the body of Clyde Tombaugh and you burn up this information. These ashes are no different from the ashes of a cigarette. And if another civilization finds those ashes, they would think that we are not very intelligent, because NASA basically took the genetic information of Clyde Tombaugh and burned it up. And you would think that if they wanted to celebrate Clyde Tombaugh, they would actually put that genetic information about him in electronic form on the spacecraft, or send a frozen stem cell. But instead, they put ashes. So I'm a little bit embarrassed by what we did. I don't think that we would look very intelligent to extraterrestrials, but nevertheless, indeed, we send those out, and we should check if other civilizations did the same. And we can think of the solar system like a mailbox. And the question is, do we have any mail, any packages in the mailbox? And of course, a lot of my colleagues would say, oh, no, we don't have any mail. I don't want even to go to the mailbox until I have extraordinary evidence. My point is, you will never have extraordinary evidence for mail unless you walk to the mailbox and check it out. And I think it's extremely important, because there may be an important message there that could help the future of humanity. And if we don't check it, it would be just like finding a love letter in the attic of your home whose time has passed. So it's outdated. And, you know, we may miss an opportunity if we don't check whether we have mail.
Me encanta la metáfora del buzón que usted está proponiendo, y le hago una pregunta. ¿Cree usted que lo que ocurrió en 2017 con la detección de Oumuamua fue una carta en nuestro buzón?
Yeah, it could have been. We just didn't collect enough data about it. And what I would have liked is to have an image of this object, so we can tell whether it's artificial or natural. But it behaved unlike any comet or asteroid that we have seen before in the solar system. So I suggested it's artificial in origin. And a lot of my colleagues did not want to discuss that possibility. But to me, it looks like this possibility is real, because all of the other alternative explanations of the anomalies of Oumuamua, the peculiar properties that I describe in my book, all of them suggested something that we have never seen before, like a hydrogen iceberg, nitrogen iceberg, or maybe a cloud of dust particles. These are things that we've never seen before. And I say, if you have to consider something we've never seen before, you better consider also an artificial origin. And because otherwise it would be just like a caveman finding a cell phone, and the caveman would say, oh, the cell phone looks like an unusual rock of a type that I've never seen before, which is a true statement that it looks like nothing we have seen before, which is pretty much what the astronomer said about Oumuamua. But then if the caveman is not throwing that cell phone away, but instead considering this as a learning experience, then the caveman may push a button and realize that the cell phone records his voice, and push another button and realize that it records his image. And then he will realize that it's not really a rock, it's something else. So I very much hope that we will continue to monitor the sky, and that's what we plan to do with the Galileo project, and find another object like Oumuamua, and then we may be able to send a spacecraft equipped with a camera that will take a close-up photograph of it, because they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. In my case, a picture is worth 66,000 words, the number of words in my book. I wouldn't need to write the book if I had a picture of this object. And what I really want is to land on such an object and press buttons if it looks artificial.
En Extraterrestre, usted describe con todo detalle Oumuamua, dice que es un objeto muy alargado, extraordinariamente alargado, como ningún otro asteroide o cometa que se haya detectado jamás. Es además un objeto que refleja la luz de una manera muy particular y también que, sobre todo, tiene un comportamiento de velocidad muy raro. Acelera cuando quizá debería haber ido perdiendo velocidad. Estos son tres elementos de sus características, pero lo que a usted le lleva a pensar cuando analiza Oumuamua es que quizá Oumuamua, por esas características físicas, podría ser una especie de nave vela, una gran vela solar. Y curiosamente, usted, 17 meses antes de que se detectara Oumuamua, había puesto en marcha un proyecto científico para construir velas solares que poder empujar con haces láser hasta las profundidades del universo. La verdad es que la coincidencia es extraordinaria, ¿no le parece?
Well, it's an interesting coincidence, but I should say that it may not be a sail necessarily. What I concluded, based on the fact that it was pushed by reflecting sunlight, is that the object needs to be very thin. And in September 2020, there was another object discovered by the Pan-STARRS telescope in Haleakala, Hawaii, that was pushed by reflecting sunlight and had no cometary tail, just like Oumuamua, the same qualities. And then the astronomers that discovered it gave it the name 2020 SO. And then they realized that if they go back in time, this object actually came from Earth. It was a rocket booster that was launched in 1966 as part of a lunar lander mission. And we know that it had very thin walls. And that's why it had a large area for its mass, and it was pushed by reflecting sunlight. And we know that it's artificial, but it was not produced as a light sail. It was not produced in order to be pushed as a result of reflecting sunlight. It was just a very thin rocket booster, that's all. It had thin walls. And this is important because it may imply that Oumuamua was just like this object, artificial, but it was not designed to be a light sail. It was just thin. And the question is, what was its purpose? Now, it could have been, for example, just like a plastic bag tumbling in the wind, that is not functional anymore, just like trash, space trash, a layer of an outer part of a bigger object, that was torn apart and is not functional. Or it could have been, for example, a receiver that is trying to collect signals and is very thin. We don't know the purpose, the intent of this object, because to figure out what it's meant to be, we need much more data. But I think it's sufficiently intriguing, and that's what I'm trying to advocate. It's sufficiently intriguing for us to continue the search for objects like it and try to find evidence for things that do not look like natural objects, do not look like rocks. And it's just like walking on the beach. Most of the time you see natural rocks that were produced by nature, but every now and then you find a plastic bottle that may indicate that a civilization is out there.
Tengo la impresión, doctor Loeb, que la gran aportación que usted ha hecho con este libro, con Extraterrestre, es invitar a la opinión pública en primer lugar, pero a la comunidad científica en segundo lugar y de manera muy importante, a reflexionar sobre la gran pregunta filosófica de si estamos solos en el universo. Usted se ha fijado en Oumuamua, se podría haber fijado en otros objetos interestelares como Borisov, que fue uno que apareció un tiempo después. Probablemente descubriremos más, como usted ya ha anunciado, próximamente, pero la duda que queda cuando se lee su libro es ¿por qué la ciencia invierte tan poco en esta investigación en fin, de tratar de averiguar si estamos solos en el universo? ¿Por qué se ponen tan pocos recursos en esta investigación? E incluso cuando se habla de extraterrestres o de posible inteligencia extraterrestre, se ridiculiza a quien habla de ello en foros científicos. ¿Qué es lo que nos pasa? O mejor dicho, ¿qué le pasa a la comunidad científica que a veces parece temer entrar en el debate extraterrestre?
Well, this is the most fundamental question. And, you know, I had more than 1,200 interviews over the past 7 months about my book after it appeared in English. And this question kept repeating again and again. And only last week, I was able to figure out what I think is the actual reason and the good answer to your question. And I published it in an essay in Medium. And my understanding is that it all boils down to our ego. So if you look back at history, humans always tended to think that we are at the center of the universe because, you know, we are born into the world like actors put on a stage, and we think that the play is about us. But that was the wrong idea. You know, the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle argued that we are at the center of the universe, and for 1,000 years, people believed him because it flattered their ego. So it all starts from our ego. We want things to be about us, and it's not really the case. You know, even when Enrico Fermi 70 years ago asked, "Where is everybody?" That is a very presumptuous question because, you know, if you sit at your home and you don't hear anyone knocking on your door, it doesn't mean that you don't have neighbors. You just have to wait. And our recorded history is for 10,000 years. That's all. It's 1/1,000,000th of the age of the solar system. So how dare we just sit at home and we don't hear a knock on our door and say, "Where is everybody? We are the smartest. There is nobody out there." I think that's very presumptuous. And if you continue along history, you know, after we realize that we are not at the center of the universe, that in fact the universe is much bigger, and moreover, the universe existed for 13.8 billion years since the Big Bang, and we just came at the end. So clearly the play is not about us. We are not central actors in this play. And of course, out of humility, we should ask, are there other actors out there? You know, instead, a lot of scientists say, we don't want to engage in this question until we have extraordinary evidence. And my point is, you know, we don't know what most of the matter in the universe is. We call it dark matter. And for 4 decades, 40 years, basically since I started practicing astrophysics, we have searched. That was part of the mainstream, trying to find out the particles that make up most of the matter in the universe. And there were early suggestions about 40 years ago, and we invested hundreds of millions of dollars in that search. We haven't found anything. And I once asked one of these experimentalists, how long will you continue? You've done it for 40 years. You haven't found the particular particle that you're looking for. Would you waste your entire life searching for it? And he said, as long as I'm funded, I will continue. So my point is, if we find that the dark matter is weakly interacting massive particles, it will have very little impact on our daily lives. But if we find that Oumuamua or objects like it are technological in origin and they represent a smarter kid on our cosmic block, that would have a major impact on humanity. And the point is that even if we search for equipment for 4 decades, 40 years, and invest hundreds of millions of dollars and don't find anything, even then we will just be exactly at the same point as the dark matter search is right now. So how can we say we don't want to discuss this subject right now? We don't want to fund it, which is pretty much the situation. There is no funding except for the Galileo project that I established in terms of searching for equipment from other civilizations. How can we say we don't want to discuss it until we have extraordinary evidence? The point is, you will never have that evidence unless you fund it. And please fund it for hundreds of millions of dollars over a period of 40 years before you say anything, because that's exactly what happened with the dark matter search so far, and that was part of the mainstream of science. So I think this subject, given that the public is extremely interested in it, that subject must be part of the mainstream of science. And we've been searching for radio signals over maybe 70 years or so, and we haven't found it. That's the wrong approach, because it's just like trying to have a phone conversation. You need the counterpart to be active. And instead, I suggest going for a method that is similar to archaeology, which is looking for equipment, relics that we can find in our backyard that came from other civilizations.
Me gusta mucho esa respuesta de que es el ego, el orgullo humano lo que nos impide tomarnos más en serio esta cuestión, porque quizá nos da miedo. Pero le quería hacer una reflexión. Esto no ha sido siempre así. Hace cientos y cientos de años la humanidad era teocéntrica, ponía a Dios como el centro de todo y mostraba temor a ese Dios. Llegó el Renacimiento y nos volvimos antropocéntricos, colocamos al ser humano en el centro y ese es el momento en el que nosotros estamos. Somos herederos de ese cambio de paradigma. ¿Cree usted que el hallazgo de unas reliquias extraterrestres en nuestro patio de atrás quizá mañana nos cambien el paradigma y pasemos de teocéntricos a antropocéntricos y quizá en el futuro, no sé cómo llamarlo, quizá cosmocéntricos? ¿Cree que un hallazgo de esas características nos cambiaría como especie?
Yeah, this is my hope, because if you look at humans, it's not just about us being at the center of the universe, us being the smartest kid on the block, which is pretty much what my daughters thought until I took them to the kindergarten and they met other kids. It's not just that, but for example, we developed physics over the past century, and that allows us to feel superior relative to the physical world because we know the laws of physics that all the particles in the observable volume of the universe must obey. So they are just like slaves. The electrons, the protons, the atoms are all obeying the same laws of physics. And we can feel superior to them because we have free will. If there was an equation that predicts what we will do the opposite and basically contradict that equation. So we feel that we are superior relative to the material world, which has to obey the laws of physics. And again, when we look at primitive life, if, for example, the Perseverance rover on the surface of Mars, if it finds evidence that there was primitive life in the form of microbes on the surface of Mars, we would still feel superior to that because we are intelligent. And these microbes were not as intelligent as we are. So everyone will be happy in the mainstream of science about that. But just imagine the Perseverance rover bumping into the wreckage of a spaceship that represents technologies that are far more advanced than we ever developed. That would be a blow to our ego. And a lot of people will be upset about that. When I teach my class at Harvard, I usually tell the students that half of the students in the class are below the median. This is just a statistical fact. That's how the median is defined. Half of the class is below it, half is above it. And they get very upset because they can never imagine that half of them are below the median. And my point is, it's very likely that we are not the most intelligent that ever existed in the universe, that we are sort of in the middle of the distribution. And of course, that is troubling to a lot of scientists. Now, I should say that humans are not only feeling superior relative to the physical world, relative to microbes, but also relative to animals. We eat animals. We feel that they don't have the level of consciousness, the level of intelligence that we have, and we feel superior. Moreover, even worse than that, we feel superior relative to other people. If you look at human history, it's very much shaped by the desire of some group of people to feel superior relative to other people. And the best example is the Second World War, where the Nazi regime triggered the death of 75 million people. That was 3% of the world population in 1940. And just think about it, it's 20 times more deaths than caused by COVID-19 so far. And we have been discussing COVID-19 for a year and a half. Just a group of people trying to feel superior relative to other people killed 20 times more people. And I say, if we find evidence for another civilization that is much more intelligent than we are, that will give us a sense of modesty. And perhaps it will inspire us to recognize that the small differences between people that we have are really meaningless, that in fact we should respect each other as equal members of the human species.
Me está usted recordando continuamente esa imagen del monolito de la película 2001, ese momento en el que unos homínidos, antepasados nuestros, tropiezan con un trozo de tecnología que no saben interpretar. Y también me ha recordado una información que se publicó en 2011, cuando Paul Davies, de la Universidad de Arizona y un gran divulgador científico, propuso utilizar las imágenes del Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter para buscar en esos miles y miles de fotografías de la superficie de la Luna algún vestigio de tecnología extraterrestre abandonada hace miles o decenas de miles de años en la superficie de nuestro planeta. Parecen ideas de ciencia ficción, pero usted las está aproximando a la ciencia. ¿Cree que encontraremos ese monolito de 2001 en nuestro margen de vida, que usted y yo lo veremos?
Well, I think it's very likely that there were civilizations that predated us by billions of years and that they were more developed than we are. If you look at the news every day, you realize that we are not very intelligent, because I defined an intelligent culture as a culture that is following the guiding principles of science, and that is sharing evidence-based knowledge. And if you look at what we do, we don't share much. We do not cooperate much on a daily basis. A good example is that the information about COVID-19 that was found first in Wuhan, China, was not shared with the rest of the world. And that could have saved lives of many people. And the second thing is that if you look at policy decisions, they are not shaped by evidence very often. And so that's another illustration that we are not very intelligent. So I believe that, we have a lot to learn from other civilizations. We should be modest, and basically we should look at the sky. And I think that we will find evidence if we search. The problem is really that we haven't done a search until the Galileo project was established 2 months ago, that we haven't really done that search, and we had a prejudice. We were blocked by that. And the subject, as you say, is ridiculed. But frankly, I don't care how many likes I have on Twitter. I pretty much am driven by my curiosity. I want to figure out what the reality is. If we don't look through our window, it doesn't mean that we don't have neighbors. I think we should check if we have neighbors, and we have the instruments to do that. And I believe that if we do that, we will find something. That's my belief, because I know that we sent out equipment into space, and I know that most of the stars formed billions of years before the sun, and I know that there are tens of billions of planets like the Earth floating in the Milky Way galaxy. So I say, okay, well, if you consider all of this and you remain modest, you don't assume that you are the smartest, there must have been technological civilizations before us. We are developing artificial intelligence now that can drive cars that will outsmart us within a decade. And we could imagine sending it to space together with 3D printing. And once you combine 3D printing with artificial intelligence, you can imagine systems that can reproduce themselves. And they can fill up the galaxy in a billion years. So the question is really, do we live in such a reality? And I think it's quite possible that we live in such a reality. It's just that we haven't checked. And an object smaller than the size of a football field would not have been found before the Pan-STARRS telescope started surveying the sky. So there could be a lot of small objects that represent technological equipment that are passing near Earth, and we have never noticed them. And so I really think that we should look. And I think that once we do, I believe that we will find something during my lifetime. So I don't think it's very far away. The real problem is that the subject is ridiculed and the search was not done as a result of that by the scientific community.
Doctor Loeb, déjeme decirle que desde mi perspectiva, los buenos libros son los libros que mueven el mundo, que de alguna manera mueven la realidad. Y es evidente que Extraterrestre ha movido algo en el mundo científico y que desde luego, en fin, vamos a recibir sus resultados a través de este proyecto Galileo que acaba de echar a andar. La verdad es que en estos compases finales de nuestra conversación, lo único que me queda es desearle todo lo mejor en esta investigación, agradecerle ese guiño que ha tenido con nosotros al recordar al principio de la conversación que usted tiene la mitad de su ADN español. También en su equipo, cuando ha trabajado con Oumuamua, ha contado con mucha ayuda de científicos españoles o de origen hispano, Amaya Moro Martín, Gonzalo González, Matías Zaldarriaga, todos ellos están mencionados en su libro, y eso hace que su investigación esté muy cerca también de nosotros y se lo agradecemos de verdad. Muchísimas gracias, doctor Loeb.
Thanks for having me.
Un abrazo.